You know the saying, don't judge a book by its cover. Well, some people never learn. Imagine sitting in first class, minding your own business, when a woman decides you don't belong there simply because of the color of your skin. She screamed, she insulted, and finally she threw a glass of red wine right into his face. She thought she was putting a thug in his place. But when the liquid dripped down his chin, the man didn't yell. He didn't fight back. He simply stood up, wiped his face, and delivered 5 words that turned her blood to ice. I own this airline. This is the story of Victoria Belmont's worst mistake and the brutal karma that followed. You are not going to believe how this ends. The early morning fog still clung to the tarmac at JFK International Airport. Inside the exclusive lounge of Ascend Airways, the atmosphere was a hushed symphony of clinking china and soft jazz. Elijah Thorne sat in the corner far away from the buffet and the bar. To the casual observer, Elijah didn't look like the kind of man who belonged in the flagship lounge of the world's fastest-growing luxury airline. He was wearing a charcoal grey hoodie, distressed denim jeans, and a pair of vintage sneakers. He had over-ear headphones resting around his neck, and his eyes were glued to a beat-up paperback novel. At 38 years old, Elijah was a ghost in the corporate world. He was the majority shareholder and CEO of Ascend Airways, a company he had built from a single cargo plane into a global empire. But Elijah hated the spotlight. He hated the suits, the boardrooms, and the pretenses. He preferred to fly incognito, often testing his own airline's service standards by posing as a regular passenger. Today he was flying to London for a secret merger meeting. He had booked seat 1A, the most coveted spot on the plane, under a pseudonym, E.T. King. Mr. King. A soft voice interrupted his reading. Elijah looked up to see Sarah, one of his lead flight attendants. She didn't know he was the CEO. To her, he was just a polite, frequent flyer who tipped well. Boarding is starting for first class, sir, Sarah said with a warm smile. Thank you, Sarah. Elijah said, his voice deep and calm. He picked up his battered leather duffel bag, which actually held a laptop worth more than most cars, and headed for the gate. As he walked down the jet bridge, he felt that familiar sense of peace. He loved aviation. He loved the engineering, the logistics, the magic of flight. But that peace was about to be shattered. Walking just a few feet behind him was a couple that radiated expensive chaos. Victoria Belmont was a woman who wore her wealth like armor. She was draped in a beige trench coat that cost more than the average American's mortgage payment, clutching a bright orange Hermes Birkin bag as if it were a weapon. Beside her was her husband, Arthur Belmont, a man who looked perpetually tired, wearing a suit that was too tight and checking his watch every 30 seconds. I don't understand why we have to wait behind these people, Victoria said loudly, her voice echoing in the narrow tunnel. Priority boarding means priority. I didn't pay $12,000 to stand in line behind the janitorial staff. Elijah stiffened slightly but kept walking. He knew she was talking about him. It wasn't the first time. Being a black man in luxury spaces often drew confused and sometimes hostile stares. He usually ignored it. He stepped onto the plane, greeted the purser, and settled into seat 1A. It was a suite really completely enclosed with sliding privacy doors, a lie-flat bed, and a 24-inch 4K screen. He tossed his duffel bag into the overhead bin and sat down, pulling his hoodie up slightly to get comfortable. A moment later, Victoria Belmont stormed onto the plane. She stopped dead in the aisle, her eyes scanning the cabin until they landed on seat 1A. Her face twisted in confusion, then immediate anger. "Excuse me," she barked, not at the flight attendant, but directly at Elijah. Elijah looked up, keeping his expression neutral. "Yes." "You're in my seat," she snapped, tapping her boarding pass against her palm. "1A. That's always my seat." Elijah glanced at his own ticket on his phone, then back at her. "I'm afraid not, ma'am. I'm in 1A. Perhaps you're in 1B or across the aisle." Victoria's face flushed a deep, ugly red. She turned to Sarah, the flight attendant who was rushing over to assist. "Sarah!" Victoria practically screamed, reading the name tag. "You need to check this man's ticket immediately. He is confused. He's obviously in the wrong cabin." Sarah kept her professional mask on, though her eyes showed panic. "Mrs. Belmont, welcome aboard. May I see your boarding pass?" Victoria shoved the paper into Sarah's chest. "I booked 1A. My husband is in 1B. We always sit together. This individual is in my spot." Sarah scanned the pass. "Mrs. Belmont, your ticket is for 2A. That's the suite directly behind this one. It has the same amenities." "I don't want 2A, Victoria shouted. "I want 1A. I specifically told my assistant to book the front row. I don't want to stare at the back of this man's hoodie for 7 hours. She pointed a manicured finger at Elijah. "Look at him. He doesn't even look like he can afford a coach ticket, let alone first class. Did you upgrade an employee? Is that it? Is he deadheading?" Elijah slowly closed his book. He took a deep breath. He could have ended it right there. He could have pulled out his ID badge. He could have told Sarah to check the corporate registry. But Elijah wanted to see how his crew handled this. And part of him wanted to see just how far Victoria Belmont was willing to go. "Ma'am," Elijah said, his voice smooth but firm. "I paid for this seat. I'm not moving." The cabin went silent. Victoria looked at him as if he had just slapped her. "You paid?" She let out a cruel, incredulous laugh. "With what drug money? Or did you steal a credit card?" "Arthur." Her husband finally spoke up, pulling at her arm. "Victoria, stop it. Just sit in row 2. It's fine." "It is not fine, Arthur." She shook him off. "I will not be disrespected by the help." Sarah stepped between them. "Mrs. Belmont, please take your seat. We need to close the doors for departure. If you continue to cause a disturbance, we will have to escort you off the plane." The threat hung in the air. Victoria glared at Sarah, then at Elijah. She realized she wasn't going to win this specific battle yet. She smoothed her coat, sneering. "Fine," she hissed. "But this isn't over. I'm going to have a word with the pilot once we're in the air. This is unacceptable." She stomped to seat 2A, throwing her bag down with a heavy thud. Elijah didn't turn around, but he knew this was going to be the longest flight of his life. The plane taxied and took off smoothly. As the "Fasten Seatbelt" sign dinged off, the Ascend Airways crew sprang into action. They were known for their impeccable service, champagne warm nuts, hot towels. Elijah reclined his seat slightly. He opened his laptop to review the merger documents. He was trying to focus on the valuation of a European logistics company, but Victoria Belmont was making it impossible. From the row behind him, her voice carried clearly. She wasn't even trying to whisper. "I can't believe the standards have dropped this low, Arthur," she was saying. "It smells like cheap weed and fast food up here now. Can you smell it?" Elijah wasn't smoking, and he certainly hadn't eaten fast food. He was wearing a custom scent from a perfumer in Paris oud and bergamot. It was subtle and expensive. "I don't smell anything, Victoria," Arthur muttered. "You never do." she snapped. Then she raised her voice. Stewardess Sarah. Sarah appeared instantly. Yes, Mrs. Belmont. Can I get you a drink? I need some air freshener, Victoria said loudly enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. The odor coming from the row in front of me is nauseating. It's unsanitary. Sarah looked mortified. She glanced at Elijah, who was typing away, ignoring the insult. I can't spray anything while we are serving food, ma'am, Sarah said softly, but the air filtration system is state-of-the-art. Well, it's not working against that. Victoria gestured aggressively toward Elijah's headrest. And another thing, why is he allowed to have his hood up? Isn't that a security risk? How do we know he isn't hiding a weapon? Mrs. Belmont, please, Sarah said, her tone hardening slightly. Mr. King is a valued passenger. He has been through TSA just like everyone else. Please lower your voice. Don't tell me what to do, Victoria spat. I know the owner of this airline personally, you know. We met at a gala in the Hamptons. If I tell him how his staff is treating me, you'll be serving drinks on a bus to Jersey. Elijah paused his typing. He smirked. He had never been to a gala in the Hamptons. He hated the Hamptons, and he had certainly never met this woman. He decided to test the waters. Without turning around, he spoke up. If you know the owner, Elijah said, not looking back, you'd know he prioritizes respect above all else. There was a rustle of fabric as Victoria unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. She leaned over the partition of his suite, invading his personal space. Her face was contorted with malice. Excuse me, she demanded. Did you just speak to me? Elijah turned his head slowly. He looked her dead in the eye. I said you're lying. You don't know the owner. Victoria gasped. You insolent little Arthur. Did you hear him? He called me a liar. Arthur didn't move. He had his noise-cancelling headphones on, eyes closed, pretending to be asleep. He had checked out of this marriage years ago. Sit down, Mrs. Belmont, Elijah said coolly. You're disturbing the peace. I am a platinum member, she shrieked. I pay for the peace. You are the disturbance. You are the pollution in this cabin. Other passengers were starting to stare. A man in 3A, a tech CEO named David, looked ready to intervene, but Elijah held up a hand, signaling he had it under control. Sarah rushed back with the purser, a tall man named James. Mrs. Belmont, you need to sit down right now. James said, his voice booming. This is your final warning. Interfering with a flight crew and harassing passengers is a federal offense. Victoria looked at James, then at Elijah. She saw the calm confidence in Elijah's eyes, the lack of fear, and it drove her over the edge. She sat down, but she was vibrating with rage. She ordered a double vodka tonic, then another, then a glass of red wine. Elijah went back to his work, hoping the alcohol would put her to sleep. But alcohol rarely sedates an angry racist. It just removes the filter. An hour passed. The cabin lights were dimmed. Elijah was reviewing a spreadsheet when he felt a heavy thud against the back of his seat. She was kicking it. Thump. He ignored it. Thump. Oops, she giggled maliciously. Leg cramp. Elijah closed his laptop. He took a deep breath. He pressed the call button. Sarah appeared. Yes, Mr. King. I am so sorry, she whispered. Sarah. I don't want to cause a scene, Elijah whispered back. But she is kicking my seat. Is there any way to move her or me? The cabin is full, sir, Sarah said, looking ready to cry. "I've cut her off from alcohol. James is writing up a report right now. Police will be waiting in London." "Good," Elijah said. "Thank you, Sarah." He thought it was handled. He thought he just had to endure 5 more hours. He was wrong. Dinner service began. The smell of roasted lamb and truffle mashed potatoes filled the cabin. Elijah had ordered the fish. He had his tray table down a white linen napkin tucked into his collar to protect his shirt, a rare vintage t-shirt, under the hoodie that was actually a collector's item worth $500. Victoria had been quiet for 20 minutes. The crew thought she had passed out. Suddenly, Elijah heard the click of heels on the floor. He looked up to see Victoria standing right next to his aisle. She was swaying slightly, a full glass of Cabernet Sauvignon in her hand. Her eyes were glassy and full of hate. "I figured it out," she slurred, leaning against his sweet wall. Elijah didn't engage. He reached for his water. "You're a rapper, aren't you?" she sneered. "Or a ball player?" "That's the only way you people get money." Elijah sighed. "Ma'am, please return to your seat." "Don't you dismiss me." Her voice rose to a scream again. "I am sick of it. I am sick of everything being handed to you." "Affirmative action seats. You probably didn't even pay for this. You probably used miles you stole. Mrs. Belmont." James the purser was running down the aisle from the galley. "I want him moved," Victoria screamed, pointing the wine glass at Elijah. "I want him in the back where he belongs. I will not eat my dinner, staring at a thug." Elijah turned to her. His patience had evaporated. The steel in his spine straightened. "The only thug on this plane is you," Elijah said, his voice dropping an octave, resonating with authority. "You are drunk, you are disorderly, and you are embarrassing yourself." The truth hit her hard. For a split second, she looked stunned. Then the humiliation turned into blind aggression. "How dare you?" she whispered. Her hand shook. "Mrs. Belmont, drop the glass," James shouted just a few feet away. She didn't drop it. With a sneer of pure contempt, she flicked her wrist. "Cool off," she said. The wave of dark red wine flew out of the crystal glass. Time seemed to slow down. Elijah saw it coming, but he was strapped in. He couldn't move. The liquid splashed across his face. It soaked into his grey hoodie. It splattered onto his laptop keyboard. It dripped down onto the pristine white linen tablecloth. The cold liquid stung his eyes. The smell of alcohol was overpowering. The entire first-class cabin gasped in unison. Even Arthur, the husband, stood up, horrified. "Victoria, what have you done?" Silence. Absolute terrifying silence. Elijah sat there, the red wine dripping from his nose and chin. He didn't flinch. He didn't wipe it away immediately. He just sat there, statue still. Victoria stood panting, looking at her handiwork. For a second, she looked triumphant. Then Elijah slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. The click of the buckle sounded like a gunshot in the silent cabin. He stood up to his full height. Elijah was 6'2", broad-shouldered and imposing. With the red wine looking almost like blood on his face, he looked terrifying. Sarah and James rushed forward to restrain Victoria, but Elijah held up a hand. They stopped. There was a command in his gesture that they couldn't disobey. Elijah picked up a napkin and slowly wiped his eyes. He dropped the stained cloth onto his tray. He looked at Victoria. She was starting to tremble now. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the realization that she had just assaulted a man. she stammered, trying to regain her ground. "You deserved that. You provoked me." Elijah reached into his wet pocket. He pulled out a black wallet. He didn't pull out ID. He pulled out a sleek titanium card that didn't look like a credit card. It had the gold logo of Ascend Airways embossed on it, and the words Chairman and CEO. He didn't show it to her. He held it up to James the purser. "James," Elijah said calmly. James looked at the card. His eyes widened to the size of saucers. His face went pale. He looked from the card to Elijah's face, finally recognizing the man he had seen in the company newsletters, the man who signed the checks. Mr. Thorne," James choked out. Victoria laughed nervously. "Mr. Thorne, who cares? Arrest him." Elijah ignored her. He looked at James. "We are turning this plane around," Elijah said. "But, sir, we are over the Atlantic," James stammered. "I don't care," Elijah said, his voice cold as ice. "Dump the fuel. Contact ATC. Tell them we have a level 4 security threat on board. We are returning to JFK." Victoria rolled her eyes. "Who do you think you are? You can't turn a plane around. You're nobody." Elijah finally turned his gaze back to Victoria. He stepped closer, invading her space this time. He smelled of wine and power. "You said you knew the owner," Elijah said softly. He leaned in his voice a dangerous whisper. "I own this plane. I own the gate we left from. I own the lounge you waited in. I own this airline." Victoria froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color drained from her face so fast, she looked like a corpse. "And you," Elijah continued, "have just made the biggest mistake of your life." The silence in the first-class cabin was shattered by the sudden aggressive change in the engine's pitch. The massive Rolls-Royce Trent engines of the Ascend Airways, Boeing 787. Dreamliner didn't just hum, they roared as the thrust was pulled back. Elijah Thorne didn't sit back down. He stood in the aisle, wine still dripping from his chin onto the expensive carpet, looking like a vengeful deity. "James," Elijah said to the purser, his voice eerily calm, "I need access to the cockpit. Now." "Yes, Mr. Thorne. Right this way," James stammered. He punched the code into the keypad of the reinforced cockpit door and knocked the specific rhythm that signaled a crew entry. Victoria Belmont was still frozen in the aisle, her mouth agape. As Elijah brushed past her, she seemed to snap out of her trance. The reality of what he had said, "I own this airline," was battling with her deep-seated prejudice. Her brain simply refused to accept it. "He's lying," she shrieked, turning to the other passengers who were watching with wide eyes. "He's clearly insane. You can't let him into the cockpit. He's going to hijack the plane. He's a terrorist." David the Tech, CEO in seat 3A, finally spoke up. He held up his phone. "Lady, I just Googled Ascend Airways CEO. That's Elijah Thorne. That is literally the man who owns the plane. You are in so much trouble." Victoria snatched the phone from his hand, stared at the image of Elijah on the screen, clean-shaven and wearing a suit, but unmistakably the same man, and dropped the device onto the floor. Her hands started to shake uncontrollably. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was tense. Captain Richard Vance and First Officer Emily Hart turned as the door opened. "James, we have a situation," Captain Vance asked. Then his eyes widened as he saw the wine-soaked man standing behind the purser. "Who is this, sir? You need to leave the flight deck immediately." "Captain Vance," Elijah said, wiping his face with a fresh towel James had handed him. "It's Elijah. Elijah Thorne." Vance squinted, then his jaw dropped. He had met the CEO once at a holiday party 3 years ago. "Mr. Thorne." "Good God, sir. What happened? Are you injured?" "Assaulted by a passenger in 1A. Physical assault, interference with a flight crew, and hate speech." Elijah listed the offenses with the precision of a prosecutor. "I've already ordered a return to JFK. I'm confirming that order now." Captain Vance didn't hesitate. In the hierarchy of aviation, the pilot in command has the final say. But when the owner of the company, who was also a licensed pilot, gives an order based on a security threat, you listen. "Understood, sir," Vance said, flipping switches on the overhead panel. "We are heavy, though. We're full of fuel for a 7-hour flight to London. We're way over maximum landing weight." "Dump it," Elijah said. The decision costing him roughly $50,000 in seconds. "Dump the fuel. Get us on the ground. Have the Port Authority police and the FBI waiting at the gate. I want her in handcuffs before her feet touch the jet bridge." "Copy that," Vance said. He keyed the mic to air traffic control. "New York Center, ascend 101 heavy. We are declaring a pan. We have a level 4 disturbance on board, requesting a vector for fuel dumping and immediate return to JFK." Back in the cabin, the reality of the situation was setting in. The plane banked sharply to the left, the force of the turn pressing everyone into their seats. Victoria stumbled back to seat 2A. She grabbed her husband's arm. Arthur was pale, staring out the window. "Arthur, do something," she hissed. "Call our lawyer. Call Henderson. Tell them I'm being harassed." Arthur pulled his arm away, a look of pure disgust on his face. "Harassed, Victoria? You threw wine on the CEO of the airline. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed us." "I didn't know," she cried, tears of frustration welling up. He looked like nobody. How was I supposed to know?" "It shouldn't matter who he is," Arthur shouted, finally losing his temper. "You don't throw things at people. You're a grown woman, not a toddler." Suddenly, the intercom crackled to life. Captain Vance's voice was grim. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. Due to a severe security incident involving an assault on a passenger, we are returning to JFK. We will be dumping fuel for the next 30 minutes to reduce our landing weight. I apologize to the rest of you for the inconvenience. All passengers will be rebooked on the next flight, and Ascend Airways will be providing substantial compensation for the delay. However, we have a zero-tolerance policy for abuse. Please remain seated." A collective groan went through the economy cabin, but in first class the mood was electric. Everyone was looking at Victoria. She stood up again, panic overriding her senses. She marched toward the galley, where Elijah was standing, cleaning the wine off his laptop. "You can't do this!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Do you know who I am?" "My family founded the Belmont Foundation. We are donors. We are—" Elijah didn't even look up from his screen. "James, if she takes one more step toward me, restrain her with the zip ties." James stepped forward, holding a pair of heavy-duty plastic flex cuffs. He looked like he was praying she would try it. "Please, Mrs. Belmont, give me a reason." She stopped. She looked at the plastic cuffs, then at Elijah's back, then at the ocean of hostile faces around her. She was trapped, a prisoner in a luxury tube at 30,000 feet. Outside the window, a white mist began to trail from the wingtips. They were dumping fuel. Thousands of gallons of Jet A kerosene were vaporizing into the atmosphere. Elijah watched the fuel dump from the galley window. That was money. That was profit evaporating. But it was necessary. He had built Ascend Airways on a principle of dignity. If he let this slide, if he let a woman abuse him and his staff just because he was black and she was rich, he stood for nothing. He pulled out his phone, which was connected to the plane's Wi-Fi. He sent a text to his chief legal officer, a shark of a lawyer named Harrison Ford, no relation but just as charismatic. Text to Harrison. Meet me at Gate 42. Bring the NYPD liaison and a press team. I was assaulted on Flight 101. We are returning. I'm pressing full charges. Federal. He saw the 3 dots of a reply appear instantly. Reply from Harrison. On it. Do you want to settle quietly? Elijah typed back 2 words. Absolutely not. The landing was hard. The plane was still heavier than ideal, and Captain Vance had to slam it onto the runway to ensure they stopped in time. The brakes screamed, shuddering the entire airframe. As the plane taxied off the active runway, flashing blue and red lights were visible through the fog. It wasn't just one police car. It was an armada. There were 3 Port Authority police cruisers, an unmarked black SUV, likely belonging to the FBI, and an ambulance. Victoria was sobbing now. Real ugly tears. She was clutching her Hermes bag like a life preserver. Arthur, tell them I'm sick. Tell them I had a reaction to medication. We can say it was Ambien. People do crazy things on Ambien. Arthur didn't answer. He was typing on his BlackBerry, presumably trying to save his own reputation before the news broke. The plane came to a halt at Gate 42. The seatbelt sign turned off, but Captain Vance was back on the intercom immediately. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. No one is to stand up. Police are boarding the aircraft. The cabin door opened. The cold New York air rushed in, mixing with the stale scent of recycled air and the lingering smell of red wine. 4 officers from the Port Authority Police Department, PAPD, marched onto the plane. They were big men, wearing tactical vests. Behind them was a woman in a sharp blazer, Special Agent Reynolds of the FBI. James, the purser, pointed directly at seat 2A. That's her, Victoria Belmont. The officers moved down the aisle. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Every passenger was craning their neck to see. Victoria Belmont, the lead officer asked. Victoria looked up, her mascara running down her face. You don't understand. It was a misunderstanding. He provoked me. He was threatening me. Ma'am, stand up, the officer said, his voice leaving no room for argument. I will not, she shrieked, gripping the armrests. I am an American citizen. I have rights. You can't arrest me for spilling a drink. You're not being arrested for spilling a drink, Agent Reynolds said, stepping forward. You are being detained for interference with a flight crew and assault on a passenger within the special aircraft jurisdiction of the United States. That is a federal felony. Stand up or we will assist you. Victoria looked at Arthur. Help me. Arthur finally looked at her. He unbuckled his seatbelt, stood up, and stepped into the aisle, moving away from her. I'll meet you at the station, Victoria. I have to call the firm. Coward, she screamed at him. You coward! The officers didn't wait. 2 of them grabbed her arms. She kicked and thrashed her expensive trench coat, twisting around her. Get your hands off me. Do you know who my father is? I'll have your badges. They spun her around. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting tight, click, 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 echoed through the first-class cabin. Victoria Belmont, you are under arrest, the officer recited. You have the right to remain silent. As they hauled her down the aisle, she passed Elijah, who was still standing in the galley, arms crossed. He had changed into a fresh Ascend Airways t-shirt, provided by the crew, but his face was stern. Victoria stopped struggling for a second as she came face to face with him. "You ruined my life," she spat at him. "Over a seat, you petty little man." Elijah leaned in his voice, calm enough for only her and the officers to hear. "You ruined your own life, Victoria. I just turned on the lights, so everyone could see who you really are." He nodded to the officers. "Get her off my plane." As she was dragged onto the jet bridge, kicking and screaming obscenities, the passengers in first class did something unexpected. Someone started clapping, then another person. Then the whole cabin. It wasn't a celebration of her pain. It was a release of tension, a validation that justice, swift, immediate justice, had actually been served. Elijah didn't smile. He turned to Sarah and James. "Get the rest of the passengers off. Give everyone in first class a voucher for a free round-trip international ticket. Coach gets $1,000 travel credit. Apologize profusely." "Yes, Mr. Thorne," Sarah said, looking at him with awe. "And are you okay?" "I'm fine," Elijah said. "But the day isn't over. I have a press conference to give." Elijah walked off the plane behind the police. Inside the terminal, it was chaos. The news had leaked. Passengers had been tweeting from the plane. #racist on plane and Ascend CEO were already trending on X, formerly Twitter. People were holding up phones recording the perp walk. Victoria Belmont, the socialite darling of the Upper East Side, was being marched through JFK in handcuffs, her hair a mess, screaming like a banshee. Elijah was met by Harrison, his lawyer, and a team of airport security. "It's a circus out there," Harrison said, handing Elijah a blazer to put over his t-shirt. "TMZ is already running the headline. Billionaire CEO assaulted in first class. The stock might take a hit from the turnaround, but the PR sentiment, it's overwhelmingly on your side." "I don't care about the PR," Elijah said, walking briskly toward the VIP exit. "I want her banned, not just from Ascend." "I know," Harrison said, matching his pace. "I've already drafted the memo to the FAA. We're pushing for the full no-fly list inclusion, and we're suing her for the cost of the fuel dump, the landing fees, and the passenger compensation." "How much?" Elijah asked. "Rough estimate, $200,000, plus punitive damages for the assault." Elijah stopped at the glass doors of the terminal. He watched the police car speed away with Victoria in the back. "Make it $300,000, Elijah said, "and donate every cent of it to the United Negro College Fund." He turned to his lawyer. "Now let's go see the police. I want to make sure the district attorney knows I am personally interested in this case." But the drama wasn't over. As Elijah stepped out into the flashing cameras of the paparazzi, he saw a black limousine pull up screeching to the curb. An older man stepped out. He was using a cane, wearing a suit that cost more than the airplane they had just landed. It was Charles Belmont, Victoria's father, a real estate mogul known for crushing his enemies. He ignored the cameras and walked straight up to Elijah, his security guards clearing a path. The old man stopped inches from Elijah. He didn't look angry. He looked lethal. "Mr. Thorne," Charles Belmont said, his voice like gravel. "You have my daughter, The NYPD has your daughter, Mr. Belmont," Elijah replied, standing his ground. "You are going to drop the charges," Charles said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a checkbook. "And you are going to tell the press this was a misunderstanding. Name your price, I'll write it right now." Elijah looked at the checkbook, then at the old man's face. "Mr. Belmont," Elijah said loud enough for the reporters to hear, "I own an airline. I don't need your money, and your daughter. She's about to learn that some things can't be bought. Charles Belmont's eyes narrowed. You're making a powerful enemy, son. I've faced worse than you, Elijah said. And don't call me son. Elijah turned his back on the billionaire and walked toward his car, leaving the old man standing in the cold, realizing that for the first time in his life, his money was worthless. The weeks following the JFK incident turned into a war of attrition. It wasn't just a legal battle. It was a battle for the narrative. Charles Belmont, Victoria's father, didn't get to be a real estate tycoon by playing fair. He hired the most aggressive PR firm in New York, Whitlock and Graves, known for burying scandals and destroying accusers. Within 48 hours, the tabloids began to run strange headlines. Was Airline CEO drunk inside sources say Elijah Thorne was erratic before incident? The aggressive executive employees claim culture of fear at Ascend Airways. They were lies, all of them, but they were designed to muddy the waters, to make the public think there were two sides to the story. Elijah sat in his office overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The news was playing on mute in the corner. His stock price had dipped 4% due to the volatility costing him millions on paper. They are trying to bait you, Elijah, Harrison, his lawyer said, pacing the room. They want you to get angry. They want you to go on TV and yell so they can paint you as the angry black man. It's a classic playbook. Elijah spun a pen between his fingers. He looked tired but focused. I'm not going to yell, Harrison. I'm going to dismantle them with the truth. Did we get the cabin video? We did. Harrison smiled a shark-like grin. The FBI released the footage from the onboard cameras, plus 2 videos submitted by passengers in row 3. It's high definition. The audio is crystal clear. Good, Elijah said. Don't leak it yet. Save it for the grand jury. Let them spin their lies a little longer. Let them dig the hole deeper. The court date for the arraignment arrived 2 weeks later. The federal courthouse in Brooklyn was surrounded by a sea of reporters. Victoria Belmont arrived in a black SUV. She had undergone a makeover. The expensive highlights were gone, replaced by a modest, darker tone. She wore a simple grey suit and minimal makeup. She looked frail, like a victim. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. Charles Belmont walked beside her, looking defiant. When Elijah arrived, he walked alone. No entourage, just him in a sharp navy suit. He walked past the cameras without saying a word, his expression unreadable. Inside the courtroom, the tension was thick enough to choke on. The prosecutor, an ambitious assistant U.S. attorney named Marcus Sterling, laid out the charges. Interference with flight crew members and attendants 49 U.S.C. Sector 46504, and simple assault within maritime and territorial jurisdiction. Victoria's lawyer, a high-priced mercenary named Dominant Goldberg, stood up. Your Honor, Goldberg boomed, my client pleads not guilty. This entire situation has been blown out of proportion by a CEO with a fragile ego. My client was having a panic attack induced by medication. She never intended to harm anyone. The assault was an accidental spill caused by turbulence. Elijah sat in the front row watching. Turbulence, he thought. The plane was smooth as glass. Goldberg continued. Furthermore, we are filing a motion to dismiss based on the fact that Mr. Thorne abused his power to unlawfully detain my client. He hijacked his own plane to humiliate a woman. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Halloway, peered over her glasses. Mr. Goldberg, are you suggesting the CEO of an airline hijacked his own flight by ordering a return for safety reasons. "I am suggesting he overreacted, Your Honor," Goldberg said smoothly. "We shall see," Judge Holloway said. "Bail is set at $500,000. Trial is set for next month." Charles Belmont posted the bail immediately. As they left the courtroom, Victoria walked past Elijah. She stopped for a brief second. The frail victim act dropped. "You're going to lose," she whispered, her eyes full of venom. "My father knows the senator. The FAA investigation will find you at fault. You'll be the one bankrupt when this is over." Elijah didn't blink. "Save your breath for the jury, Victoria." The turning point came 3 days before the trial. Charles Belmont played his final card. He tried to initiate a hostile takeover of Ascend Airways. He rallied a group of investors to buy up voting shares, trying to force the board to oust Elijah as CEO, citing reputational damage. It was a bold, desperate move. If Elijah lost his company, he would lose his power. Elijah was in the boardroom when the news hit. The board of directors was nervous. "Elijah," the chairman said, "Belmont is offering a premium. The shareholders are spooked. Maybe you should step down temporarily, just until the trial is over." Elijah stood up. He walked to the head of the table. "I built this company from a single propeller plane flying cargo to Alaska," Elijah said, his voice resonating in the oak-paneled room. "I know every bolt, every route, and every employee. If you want to sell out to a man like Charles Belmont, a man who uses his money to bully the world, then go ahead. But I will sell my shares immediately. I will dump 51% of the stock onto the open market in 1 hour. The price will crash. The company will be worthless." The room went deadly silent. It was a poison pill threat. Kamikaze tactics. "You wouldn't," the chairman gasped. "Try me," Elijah said. "I don't care about the money. I care about the integrity of this airline. So are you with me, or are you with the man whose daughter abuses our staff?" The board looked at Elijah, then at each other. They realized that without Elijah, there was no Ascend. "We're with you," the chairman said quietly. "Reject the offer." The hostile takeover failed. Charles Belmont lost millions in transaction fees. He was bleeding money. And the trial was about to begin. The United States District Court for the Eastern District of New York was packed to capacity. The air inside the mahogany-paneled room was thick, smelling of floor wax and nervous sweat. It had been dubbed the Trial of the Year by the tabloids, a collision of race, class, and aviation law that had captivated the nation. On one side sat Elijah Thorne. He was the picture of unshakable calm, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, his hands folded neatly on the table. He didn't look like a victim. He looked like a king waiting for his court to come to order. On the other side sat Victoria Belmont. The transformation was startling. The woman who had sneered at flight attendants and thrown wine with such arrogant ease was gone. In her place was a trembling, pale figure. Her legal team had dressed her in a modest, oversized cardigan to make her look small and sympathetic, but the dark circles under her eyes were real. Her father, Charles Belmont, sat in the front row of the gallery, his face a stony mask of fury. Not at the court, but at the situation his daughter's foolishness had created. Notably absent was Arthur, her husband, whose divorce filings had hit the press just 3 days prior. The trial itself was a brutal dismantling of the Belmont defense. Victoria's high-priced lawyer, Mr. Goldberg, had attempted to paint the incident as a medical episode caused by a bad reaction to sleeping pills. He argued that Elijah, a powerful billionaire, had weaponized his status to bully a confused woman. But then Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Sterling played the video. The courtroom lights were dimmed. On the massive screens, the footage from the 787's high-definition cabin cameras played in silence, then with audio. The jury watched, mesmerized. They saw Victoria standing over Elijah. They heard the slur in her voice, not of sleepiness, but of venomous hate. The audio was crisp, amplifying her words through the silent courtroom. "I am sick of everything being handed to you. Affirmative action seats." The entire room seemed to recoil. It was ugly. It was raw. Then came the climax. The flick of the wrist, the red wine splashing across Elijah's face. And then the reaction, or rather, the lack of one. The jury watched Elijah slowly unbuckle his seatbelt, wipe his eyes with dignity, and deliver the line that had been meme-D across the world: "I own this airline." When the lights came up, Victoria refused to look at the jury. She knew. Everyone knew. The deliberation took less than 90 minutes. When the jury foreman stood up, he didn't hesitate. "We find the defendant Victoria Belmont guilty on all counts: interference with flight crew members and attendants, and simple assault within the special aircraft jurisdiction of the United States." Victoria let out a sob, burying her face in her hands. But the true weight of the karma wasn't the verdict, it was the sentencing. 1 week later, they returned for the judgment. Judge Holloway, a woman known for her zero-tolerance policy regarding air rage, stared down from the bench. She adjusted her glasses, looking at Victoria not with pity, but with profound disappointment. "Mrs. Belmont," Judge Holloway began, her voice resonating off the walls, "you have lived a life of extreme privilege. You were born into wealth, you married into wealth, and you moved through the world under the assumption that the rules of common decency did not apply to you. You treated a commercial aircraft as your personal playground, and its passengers as your subjects." The judge paused, shuffling her papers. "You assaulted a man because you could not conceive of a world where a black man could sit in a seat better than yours. You endangered 300 souls by forcing an emergency fuel dump and return. You cost Ascend Airways hundreds of thousands of dollars. But more importantly, you stripped away the dignity of the people around you." Victoria was shaking violently now. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll pay the fine. My father will pay whatever you want." Judge Holloway's eyes narrowed. "That is exactly the problem, Mrs. Belmont. You think money is the solution. Today you will learn that there are currencies you cannot buy." The gavel came down. "I sentence you to 10 months in federal prison to be served immediately." A gasp ripped through the courtroom. Charles Belmont stood up in shock. Prison. For a Belmont. It was unheard of. "Sit down, Mr. Belmont," the judge snapped. She turned back to Victoria. "Following your release, you will serve 3 years of supervised probation. You are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $340,000 to Ascend Airways for fuel and operational costs, and $50,000 in punitive damages to Mr. Thorne." Victoria was weeping, openly terrified. But Judge Holloway wasn't finished. She picked up a final document, a single sheet of paper with the Department of Homeland Security seal on it. "Finally," the judge said, her voice dropping to a grave whisper. "The Federal Aviation Administration, in conjunction with the TSA, has reviewed your case. Due to the severity of the incident and the threat you posed to the safety of the flight deck, the room went deathly silent. You are hereby placed on the federal no-fly list. This is not a temporary suspension, Mrs. Belmont. This is an indefinite ban. You are prohibited from boarding any commercial aircraft that touches U.S. airspace. You are grounded. Victoria looked up, her face drained of all color. What? But I have a house in Paris. I have to go to Aspen next month. I can't fly. You can take a boat, Judge Halloway said coldly, or a train, but you will never step foot on an airplane in this country again. Court is adjourned. The bailiffs moved in. For the first time in her life, Victoria Belmont was in cuffs that weren't made of gold or diamond. As she was led away, she looked back at Elijah. He offered her a single solemn nod, a final goodbye to the woman who tried to clip his wings, only to lose her own. 8 months later. The autumn wind whipped across the tarmac of Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, a hub for private jets and the ultra-wealthy. Elijah Thorne stood near the wing of a sleek, brand-new Gulfstream G700. It was the latest acquisition for the Ascend private charter fleet. He was inspecting the landing gear, chatting with his chief pilot, Captain Vance. Ascend's stock had tripled since the trial. The publicity had turned the airline into a symbol of integrity. "She's a beauty, Elijah," Vance said, patting the fuselage. "Ready for the London run?" "Absolutely," Elijah smiled. "Let's get the wheels up in 10. As Elijah turned to head up the stairs, a commotion at the perimeter fence caught his attention. The security gate usually reserved for limousines, sweeping onto the tarmac, was blocked. A woman was arguing with the gate guard. She looked older than her years, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing a tracksuit that had seen better days. She was dragging a heavy suitcase on wheels. It was Victoria. She had been released early on house arrest, but was clearly trying to flee the jurisdiction or simply desperate to travel. Elijah walked closer to the fence, curiosity getting the better of him. He stayed behind the chain-link barrier, unobserved for a moment. "You don't understand," Victoria was screaming, her voice raspy. "It's a private charter. My father paid for it. The no-fly list is for commercial airlines. Delta United. Not this." The security guard, a burly man who looked bored, shook his head. "Lady, I already told you. The pilot filed the flight plan. Your name got flagged by the computer. The FAA controls the sky, not your daddy. If the pilot takes you up, he loses his license. You aren't getting on that plane. You aren't getting on any plane." "I can't take the bus," she shrieked, tears streaming down her face. "I have to get to the gala. I'm a Belmont." "You're a liability," the guard said, closing the gate window. "Walk away, or I call the parole officer." Victoria spun around, kicking the dirt in frustration. That's when she saw him. Elijah stood 10 yards away, on the other side of the fence, the side where the jets were. He looked immaculate in his flight jacket. Victoria froze. Her mouth opened, but no insults came out. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that the air between them felt heavy. "You," she breathed. Elijah didn't shout. He didn't gloat. He simply looked at her through the wire mesh. "It's a long drive to Miami, Victoria," Elijah said softly. "Better get started." He turned his back on her. He walked up the stairs of his $25 million jet. Victoria stood gripping the chain-link fence, her knuckles white, watching as the massive engines of Elijah's jet roared to life. The blast of air from the turbines kicked up dust, forcing her to shield her eyes. She watched as the plane taxied down the runway, gathered speed and lifted effortlessly into the grey sky, piercing the clouds and disappearing into the freedom of the stratosphere. Victoria Belmont let go of the fence. She grabbed the handle of her suitcase, turned toward the desolate road, and began the long, slow walk to the bus station. She had tried to ground a king, and in doing so, she had chained herself to the earth forever. Victoria thought her wealth was a shield, but she forgot that true power isn't about money. It's about character. She tried to crush a man she saw as beneath her, only to find out she was standing in the shadow of a giant. Elijah Thorne proved that dignity, patience, and a little bit of ownership are the best revenge. Victoria didn't just lose her freedom. She lost the very thing that defined her status, the ability to fly. She spent the rest of her days taking the bus, a permanent reminder of the day she messed with the wrong man in seat 1A. Wow, that has to be one of the most satisfying servings of karma I have ever read. What would you have done if you were Elijah? Would you have turned the plane around or handled it differently? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel, and subscribe for more incredible stories of justice and drama. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.